In the vastness of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a truth that few dare to speak. Some species are born to harvest, others to be harvested. The Zeltharan Empire had perfected this system for millennia, their massive ships descending upon worlds like mechanical vultures, taking what they pleased and leaving nothing but ash and memory. But on the outer rim of the Kepler sector, in the ruins of what was once the peaceful colony of Thessera Prime, something unprecedented was about to unfold. A single child, barely 8 cycles old, lay bleeding among the wreckage of her family's shelter. The harvesters had deemed her too weak, too small, too broken to be worth their time. They left her to die like countless others before her. What the Zeltharan Empire didn't know, what no one in the known galaxy truly understood, was that this child's desperate cries for help would reach the most dangerous species in the universe. A species that had been watching, learning, and preparing from the shadows of unexplored space. Humans had arrived in this galaxy only recently, but they carried with them something that would change the balance of power forever, an unbreakable code that said no child dies alone, and no innocent suffers while they draw breath. The harvesters thought they knew every species worth fearing. They were about to discover they were wrong. This is the story of how one dying child's plea for mercy awakened the fury of Earth's children among the stars, and how the galaxy learned that some species don't just survive. They protect those who cannot protect themselves, no matter the cost. The smoke still rose from the burning settlement when the massive Zeltharan harvester ship finally departed, its hull gleaming black against the amber sky of Thessera Prime. The vessel had spent 3 days systematically stripping the colony of everything valuable, rare minerals from the mines, technological components from the research facility, and, most horrifically, the strongest and healthiest colonists themselves. 8-year-old Kira Salas pressed her small body deeper into the twisted wreckage of what had once been her family's home. The metal beam that had fallen across her legs during the attack felt heavier with each passing hour, and the steady trickle of blood from her forehead had dried into a dark crust that pulled at her skin. Her parents were gone, taken by the harvesters along with her older brother Tam and most of the other adults. The Zeltharan soldiers had found her during their final sweep of the settlement. She remembered the way their insectoid eyes had examined her through their transparent face shields, the clicking sounds their mandibles made as they communicated in their harsh language. One had reached down with its clawed appendage, testing the weight of the beam across her legs. When it became clear that freeing her would require effort they deemed wasteful, they had simply marked her location with a red symbol and moved on. That had been 6 hours ago. The silence that followed the harvester's departure was more terrifying than the chaos of the attack itself. Kira had called out until her voice became a hoarse whisper, hoping against hope that someone else had survived, that someone would come to help her. But Thessera Prime had been home to only 43 people, and the harvesters had been thorough in their work. The young girl closed her eyes and tried to remember her mother's voice, the way she used to sing the old Earth lullabies while braiding Kira's dark hair. Her family had been among the first wave of colonists to settle on this remote world, drawn by the promise of a peaceful life far from the conflicts that plagued the inner systems. Her father had been a geological surveyor, her mother a botanist studying the unique plant life that thrived in Thessera Prime's mineral-rich soil. They had been happy here, building their simple but comfortable home with their own hands, growing their own food in the fertile valleys between the purple-stoned mountains. Kira had spent her days exploring the crystal caves near their settlement, collecting the beautiful translucent stones that grew like flowers from the cavern walls. Her brother Tam, 12 years old and always protective, had taught her how to identify the different mineral formations and how to move safely through the underground passages that honeycombed the planet's crust. Now all of that was gone, erased by the cold efficiency of an empire that saw entire worlds as nothing more than resources to be consumed. Kira opened her eyes as a shadow passed overhead. For a moment, her heart leaped with desperate hope. Perhaps the evacuation ships had finally arrived. Perhaps someone was coming to search for survivors. But it was only a native Terex, one of the large flying creatures that nested in the mountain peaks. The creature's bright orange wings caught the afternoon light as it circled once before continuing on its path, indifferent to the destruction below. The beam across her legs shifted slightly, sending a sharp spike of pain through her small body. She bit her lip to keep from crying out, tasting blood. The injury wasn't healing properly. She could feel the wrongness in her left leg, the way the bones ground against each other when she tried to move. Even if someone found her now, she might never walk normally again. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that she was alone, truly alone for the first time in her short life. The weight of that realization pressed down on her more heavily than the metal beam, making it hard to breathe. She was going to die here among the ruins of her home, and no one would ever know what had happened to her. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of deep purple and gold. The temperature would drop significantly once darkness fell. Thessera Prime's thin atmosphere couldn't hold heat effectively during the long nights. Kira knew she wouldn't survive until morning, not wounded and trapped as she was. She closed her eyes again and tried to summon the courage her parents had always told her she possessed. "You're braver than you know, little star," her father used to say when she was frightened of the strange sounds the wind made in the crystal caves. The bravest people are the ones who keep going even when they're scared. But how could she keep going when there was nowhere to go? How could she be brave when everything she loved had been taken from her? A new sound reached her ears, a low humming that seemed to come from high above. Kira's eyes snapped open, straining to see through the gathering dusk. The sound was different from the harsh mechanical roar of the Zeltheran harvester. This was smoother, almost musical, like the vibration of a crystal when struck with just the right force. A ship was descending through the atmosphere, its hull glowing faintly with controlled energy. But as it came closer, Kira could see that it was unlike any vessel she had ever encountered. Where Zeltheran ships were angular and predatory, this craft had flowing lines that seemed almost organic. Its surface appeared to shift and ripple like liquid metal, reflecting the colors of the sky in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The ship settled to the ground about 50 meters from her position, its landing completely silent despite its obvious size. For several long minutes, nothing happened. Kira held her breath, afraid to hope, afraid to call out in case this was some nightmare brought on by blood loss and exhaustion. Then, a section of the ship's hull simply dissolved, creating an opening through which a figure emerged. The being that stepped onto the scorched ground of Thessera Prime was tall and lean, moving with a fluid grace that reminded Kira of the way water flowed over stones. It wore form-fitting clothing that seemed to be made of the same shifting material as its ship, and its face was hidden behind a smooth mask that reflected the world around it like a mirror. The stranger paused at the edge of the landing site, turning its head slowly from side to side, as if sensing the air itself. Then, with deliberate steps, it began walking directly toward Kira's hiding place. Terror and hope warred in the young girl's chest. This being was clearly not human, but it also bore no resemblance to the insectoid harvesters who had destroyed her world. As it drew closer, she could see that its movements were too fluid, too controlled to be natural. Whatever this creature was, it possessed abilities far beyond those of any species she knew. The being stopped directly in front of the wreckage that trapped her, its mirrored face tilting downward to look at her. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, the stranger raised one hand, and the metal beam across Kira's legs simply lifted into the air as if weightless, drifting aside to land softly on a pile of debris several meters away. Kira gasped, partly from relief, and partly from the impossible nature of what she had just witnessed. The being had moved the massive beam without even touching it, using nothing but a gesture. But before she could fully process this miracle, the stranger was kneeling beside her, its hands moving over her injured leg with professional precision. The touch was warm, warmer than it should have been through the strange material of the being's gloves. Where those fingers traced the length of her wounds, the pain began to fade, replaced by a tingling sensation that seemed to penetrate all the way to her bones. Kira watched in amazement as the swelling in her leg visibly decreased, as the deep cuts on her forehead sealed themselves closed. But it was when the being removed its mask that Kira's world truly changed forever. The face revealed was human, startlingly, impossibly human. A woman with dark skin and kind eyes, her black hair pulled back in a practical braid. She looked to be in her 30s, with the sort of calm competence that came from years of training and experience. But there was something more in her expression, something that made Kira's chest tight with unexpected emotion. This human woman was looking at her with the same protective fury that had been in her mother's eyes whenever someone threatened her children. "My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez," the woman said in perfect standard galactic, her voice carrying the warm accent that Kira associated with the outer colonies. "I'm going to take care of you now. You're safe." Kira tried to speak, but only managed a hoarse whisper. "Are you really human?" Dr. Vasquez smiled, and in that expression Kira saw something that had been missing from her life for so long that she had forgotten how much she needed it. Unconditional kindness from someone who would protect her no matter what. "Yes, child. I'm human, and so are the people who sent me to find you. We've been looking for survivors ever since we detected the harvester attack." The doctor's hands continued their impossible healing work as she spoke, and Kira could feel strength returning to her body with each passing second. "But how did you know I was here? How did you find me?" Dr. Vasquez paused in her work, her expression growing serious. "Because we have something the Zeltharan Empire doesn't understand. We have technology that can detect the bioelectric signature of a child in distress from hundreds of light years away. Every human ship in this sector received your location the moment you started crying for help." She reached into a pouch at her belt and withdrew what looked like a simple crystalline pendant. As she held it up, the stone began to glow with soft inner light, pulsing in rhythm with Kira's heartbeat. "This is a guardian stone," Dr. Vasquez explained. "It's connected to a network that spans half the galaxy. Every human colony, every human ship, every human outpost carries them. When a child calls out in fear or pain, we hear it. No matter how far away, no matter how dangerous the rescue might be, we come." Kira stared at the glowing stone, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. "But why? I'm not even human. My family came from the Centauri colonies, but I was born here. I'm a colonial hybrid." Dr. Vasquez's smile became even warmer. "Child, there are two kinds of people in this universe: those who hurt children, and those who protect them. Humans decided long ago which kind we wanted to be. Species, origin, genetics, none of that matters. You called for help, and we answered." The doctor helped Kira sit up, supporting her as sensation returned fully to her legs. The healing process was unlike anything from conventional medicine, not just faster, but more complete. Kira could feel that her bones had been not just mended but strengthened, that the neural pathways damaged by trauma had been carefully repaired. "How is this possible?" she whispered. "Because humans didn't enter this galaxy to conquer or harvest," Dr. Vasquez replied. "We came here to learn. We studied every form of healing, every method of protection, every way to preserve and nurture life that we could find. Then, we took all of that knowledge and made it better." She gestured toward her ship, where more figures were now emerging. Kira could see that they were all human, all carrying the same purposeful air of competence that surrounded Dr. Vasquez. Some carried advanced medical equipment, others held scanning devices that hummed with barely contained energy. "We are the Guardian Corps," Dr. Vasquez continued. "Every human in this galaxy volunteers for at least 2 years of service. We maintain listening posts throughout unexplored space. We track the movements of hostile species like the harvesters, and we respond to distress calls no matter where they originate." One of the other team members approached, a tall man with graying hair and the weathered hands of someone who worked with dangerous technology. He knelt beside Dr. Vasquez and began unpacking what looked like a portable scanner. "Elena, the bio readings are stable, but we need to move quickly," he said in a low voice. "Long-range sensors are picking up Zeltharan signatures at the edge of the system. They're probably coming back to finish the resource extraction." Dr. Vasquez nodded grimly. "How long do we have?" 6 hours, maybe 7 if they stop to refuel at the asteroid mining station." Kira felt a chill that had nothing to do with the approaching night. "They're coming back?" "The harvesters often make return trips to worlds they've stripped," Dr. Vasquez explained gently. "They come back for anything they might have missed. Minerals that were too deep to extract quickly, technology that was hidden during the initial raid. Sometimes even survivors who might have useful information." The older man, whose name tag identified him as Engineer Marcus Stone, looked directly at Kira with surprising intensity, which means they're going to be very interested in why their sensors are detecting human technology signatures on a world they thought they had completely cleared. Dr. Vasquez stood smoothly, lifting Kira in her arms as if the child weighed nothing at all. "That's exactly what we're counting on," she said with a smile that was somehow both gentle and utterly dangerous. As they walked toward the impossible ship, Kira found herself looking back at the ruins of her home one last time. Everything she had ever known was gone, destroyed by beings who saw her entire world as nothing more than raw materials to be processed. Her family, her friends, her childhood, all of it erased by the cold efficiency of an empire that harvested civilizations like crops. But as Dr. Vasquez carried her toward the waiting ship, surrounded by humans who had crossed the galaxy to answer the cry of a single frightened child, Kira began to understand that her story was far from over. The Zelthran Empire might have taken everything from her, but they had also made a critical error. They had left her alive long enough for the humans to find her. And, as Engineer Stone had made clear, the humans had been hoping for exactly this kind of opportunity. The ship's interior was unlike anything Kira had ever seen, filled with technology that seemed to blend seamlessly with organic curves and surfaces that pulsed with gentle bioluminescence. As Dr. Vasquez settled her into what appeared to be a medical pod lined with the same crystal material as the Guardian Stones, Kira felt the last of her pain fade away completely. "What happens now?" she asked. Dr. Vasquez began connecting monitoring devices that seemed to respond to her thoughts rather than her touch. "Now you rest while we prepare for the harvesters to return. And when they do, they're going to discover that humans have rules about what happens to species that hurt children." Through the transparent walls of the medical pod, Kira could see other team members working with equipment that defied easy classification. Some devices looked like weapons, but weapons that hummed with controlled energy rather than the crude projectile systems used by most galactic civilizations. Others resembled the sort of terraforming tools used by deep space engineers, but modified in ways that suggested purposes far beyond planetary construction. "Are you going to fight them?" Kira whispered. Kira woke to the gentle vibration of the ship's engines and the soft murmur of human voices speaking in urgent but controlled tones. The medical pod had opened while she slept, and she found herself lying on what felt like the most comfortable bed she had ever experienced. Her legs, which had been crushed and bleeding just hours earlier, now felt stronger than they ever had before. Dr. Vasquez appeared beside her almost immediately, as if she had been monitoring Kira's sleep patterns. "How do you feel?" she asked, running a small scanner over Kira's body that projected holographic displays of her internal systems. "Different," Kira replied honestly. "Stronger. Like I could run for kilometers without getting tired." "That's the nanobiotic enhancement," Dr. Vasquez explained, helping Kira sit up. "The healing process didn't just repair your injuries, it optimized your entire biological system. Your bones are now significantly more resistant to impact trauma, your reflexes have been enhanced, and your immune system has been upgraded with broad-spectrum pathogen resistance." Kira stared at her hands, watching the way her fingers moved with newfound precision. "You changed me, only to make you healthier and safer," Dr. Vasquez assured her. "The enhancements are completely reversible if you ever want them removed, though I suspect you'll find them useful in the days ahead." She paused, her expression becoming serious. "Kira, I need to explain what's happening and give you a choice about what comes next." The doctor helped her stand and walked to a large viewing window that showed the purple-hazed surface of Thessera Prime far below. Kira could see her ruined settlement as a tiny dark spot near the base of the Crystal Mountains, already being reclaimed by the planet's aggressive vegetation. "The Zelthran Harvest Fleet is approximately 4 hours away from this system," Dr. Vasquez began. "Our intelligence indicates they're returning with a full resource extraction convoy, 12 ships instead of the single harvester that attacked your colony. They're planning to strip mine the entire planet and enslave any survivors they might have missed." Kira felt her enhanced reflexes tense automatically. "How many people are on your ship?" 17, Dr. Vasquez replied. "Plus you. 18 people against 12 harvester ships." Kira's voice rose in disbelief. That's impossible. Dr. Vasquez smiled. And there was something in that expression that reminded Kira of the way predators looked just before they struck. Child, you're thinking about this conflict in conventional terms. The Zeltharan Empire has spent millennia perfecting the art of overwhelming weaker civilizations through superior numbers and firepower. They've never encountered a species that fights the way humans do. She gestured toward the window, where Kira could now see other ships materializing out of seemingly empty space. They appeared suddenly, as if they had been invisible moments before, their hulls shimmering into existence with the same liquid metal appearance as Dr. Vasquez's vessel. How many ships is that? Kira whispered, counting the sleek forms as they took positions around Thessera Prime. 43, Dr. Vasquez replied. One for each person who died in your colony. It's a human tradition. We honor the dead by ensuring their sacrifice leads to the protection of others. But, even as she spoke, more ships were appearing. Hundreds of them, then thousands, materializing from concealment fields that had made them undetectable to conventional sensors. They formed a complex, three-dimensional pattern around the planet, creating what looked like a vast spider's web of interconnected vessels. I don't understand, Kira breathed. Where did they all come from? From every human settlement, outpost, and exploration vessel within 50 light-years, Dr. Vasquez explained. The Guardian Stone Network doesn't just detect children in distress. It coordinates our response. When your cry for help reached us, every human commander in this sector began moving toward Thessera Prime. Engineer Stone approached them, carrying what looked like a transparent tablet that displayed complex tactical information. Elena, the fleet positioning is complete. We have full sensor coverage of the system perimeter, and all cloaking fields are at maximum efficiency. The harvesters won't detect us until we want them to. Dr. Vasquez studied the tactical display, her expression shifting into what Kira was beginning to recognize as the doctor's professional mode. What's our force composition? 200 Guardian Corps vessels, 800 colonial defense ships, and approximately 3,000 private vessels whose owners volunteered for the operation, Stone replied. Total personnel, just over 47,000 humans, plus support crew from our allied species. Kira's legs felt weak despite their recent enhancement. 47,000 people came here because of me? Dr. Vasquez knelt beside her, placing gentle hands on the girl's shoulders. Kira, you need to understand something fundamental about how humans think. We don't measure the value of a rescue mission by the number of people being saved. We measure it by whether those people need our help. One child in danger is worth the same response as 1,000,000 children in danger. She stood and walked to a control panel that seemed to respond to her presence, lighting up with holographic displays of ship schematics and tactical formations. But there's something else you should know. This isn't just a rescue mission anymore. It's become something much more important. Engineer Stone manipulated the tactical display, zooming in to show detailed scans of the approaching Zeltharan fleet. The force they're bringing to finish the job on Thessera Prime includes the flagship of Harvester Prime Zektar, the architect of their expansion into this sector. He's personally responsible for the enslavement or death of over 2 million sentient beings across 17 star systems. We've been hunting him for 2 years, Dr. Vasquez added. Zektar is careful, paranoid, and extremely intelligent. He never exposes himself to unnecessary risk, always stays surrounded by overwhelming firepower, and has escape routes planned from every engagement. Getting him to come here, to this isolated system with limited escape vectors, required something he couldn't resist. Kira was beginning to understand, and the realization made her stomach clench with anxiety. You used me as bait. No, Dr. Vasquez said firmly. We would have come to save you regardless of the tactical situation. But when our intelligence network confirmed that the harvesters were planning a return expedition led by Zektar himself, we realized this was an opportunity to end his threat permanently. She turned back to the viewing window, where the vast human fleet hung invisible against the star field. Kira, humans have a saying, justice delayed is justice denied. The Zeltharan Empire has been committing genocide across this galaxy for centuries, and the established galactic governments have done nothing to stop them because they lack the will to fight a species that specializes in overwhelming force. Engineer Stone brought up new displays showing the internal layout of Zeltharan ships, their weapon systems highlighted in red. But humans didn't come to this galaxy to join the existing power structure. We came here to change it. Every ship in that fleet carries weapons and defensive systems that are generations ahead of anything the Harvesters have encountered. How is that possible? Kira asked. Humans only arrived in this galaxy 3 years ago. Dr. Vasquez smiled again, and this time there was something almost sad in her expression. Because we spent 200 years preparing for exactly this kind of conflict. When humanity first reached the stars, we discovered that the universe was a dangerous place filled with species that viewed other sentient beings as resources to be exploited. We made a decision then that shaped everything we became. She gestured toward the tactical displays showing the specifications of human technology. We would never be the strongest species, or the most numerous, or the most technologically advanced. But we could be the most prepared. Every human colony became a research station. Every human ship became a laboratory. Every human settlement became a training ground for the day when we would have to defend the innocent against those who would exploit them. Engineer Stone highlighted specific weapon systems on the display. Quantum disruption fields that can disable harvester engines without damaging the enslaved beings in their cargo holds. Neural suppression beams that can render entire enemy crews unconscious without permanent harm. Nanobiotic healing systems that can treat injuries inflicted by any known weapon type. We don't just fight to win, Dr. Vasquez explained. We fight to minimize suffering for everyone involved, including our enemies. The goal isn't to destroy the Zeltharan Empire. It's to force them to change their behavior. A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission, and a three-dimensional hologram appeared in the center of the room. It showed a woman in her 50s wearing the crisp uniform of what Kira assumed was a high-ranking military officer. Her graying hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes held the kind of focused intensity that came from a lifetime of making life-or-death decisions. Admiral Chun to all Guardian Corps vessels, the hologram announced. Zeltharan fleet has entered the system perimeter. Estimated time to planetary orbit, 37 minutes. All ships report ready status. Dr. Vasquez touched a control panel. Guardian 7 reporting ready, Admiral. Our rescued survivor is awake and has been briefed on the tactical situation. Admiral Chin's expression softened slightly as she looked at Kira. Are you all right, child? I know this must be overwhelming. Kira found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. Dr. Vasquez says you're going to fight the Harvesters because of what they did to my family. Not just your family. Admiral Chun replied gently. Because of what they've done to thousands of families across this sector. But, yes, child, we're going to make sure they never hurt anyone else the way they hurt you. The Admiral's expression hardened as she turned her attention back to the tactical situation. All ships maintain cloaking protocols until the enemy fleet reaches optimal engagement range. Remember, our primary objective is the capture or neutralization of Harvester Prime Zektar. Secondary objectives include the liberation of any enslaved beings in their cargo holds and the disabled capture of as many enemy vessels as possible. Engineer Stone was monitoring communications from the approaching fleet. Admiral, we're intercepting Zeltharan transmissions. They're discussing plans for deep core mining operations and the establishment of a permanent slave processing facility in this system. They're planning to turn Thessera Prime into a permanent base of operations, Dr. Vasquez translated for Kira. A staging ground for attacks on neighboring systems. Admiral Chen nodded grimly. Which makes this engagement even more critical. If we allow them to establish a foothold here, thousands more colonies will be at risk. She looked directly at Kira again. Child, I want you to understand that what you're about to witness will determine the fate of this entire sector. Your survival, your call for help, brought together the largest human fleet ever assembled in this galaxy. Kira felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. What do you need me to do? Just watch, Dr. Vasquez said softly. Watch and remember. Because someday, when people ask you what humans are really like, you'll be able to tell them about the day 47,000 of us came to avenge your family. Through the viewing window, Kira could see the first signs of the approaching Zeltharan fleet, tiny points of light growing steadily brighter against the star field. The enemy ships were massive, each one easily 10 times the size of the largest human vessel, their angular hulls designed to inspire terror in the species they encountered. But as Kira watched the invisible human fleet maintaining perfect position around the planet, she began to understand that size wasn't everything. The harvesters were bringing overwhelming firepower and numerical superiority, just as they had for centuries of conquest. The Zeltharan fleet emerged from hyperspace with the terrible majesty that had terrorized 1,000 worlds. 12 massive vessels arranged in perfect attack formation, their black hulls gleaming with embedded weapon systems that could reduce entire cities to molten slag within minutes. At the center of the formation was Harvester Prime Zektar's flagship, a kilometer-long behemoth called the Void Render that had personally overseen the destruction of 17 civilizations. Kira pressed her face against the viewing window, watching as the enemy ships moved into orbit around Thessera Prime with the confident arrogance of predators who had never encountered effective resistance. Their sensors swept the planet's surface, cataloging mineral deposits and analyzing atmospheric composition with the cold efficiency of beings who saw entire worlds as nothing more than inventory to be processed. "They have no idea we're here," Engineer Stone reported, monitoring the Zeltharan communications. "Their sensors are showing the system as completely empty except for the planet and its moons." Dr. Vasquez stood beside Kira, her hand resting gently on the girl's shoulder. "Human cloaking technology is based on principles we learned from studying quantum mechanics at the subatomic level. We don't just hide from their sensors. We make our ships exist in a state of quantum superposition that renders them undetectable by conventional physics." Admiral Chen's voice filled the ship as she addressed the hidden fleet. "All ships, the enemy has taken the bait. Harvester Prime Zektar is aboard the flagship as confirmed by our intelligence assets. Initiate first phase engagement protocols." What happened next defied everything Kira thought she knew about space combat. Instead of the massive energy exchanges and explosive impacts she expected, the battle began with what looked like nothing at all. The human ships remained completely invisible, but suddenly, the Zeltharan vessels began experiencing what appeared to be catastrophic system failures. The first indication of the attack was when the Void Render's main engines simply stopped working. The massive ship's forward momentum carried it helplessly through space as its engineering crew frantically tried to determine what had caused the complete shutdown of their propulsion systems. "Quantum disruptor fields," Dr. Vasquez explained as Kira watched in fascination. "We're not destroying their engines. We're convincing the quantum particles that make up their fusion cores to exist in a different dimensional state. From their perspective, their engines have simply vanished from reality." Similar failures were cascading through the Zeltharan fleet as each ship lost critical systems in sequence. Weapons arrays went offline, navigation computers crashed, and communication systems began transmitting nothing but static. Within minutes, the force that had arrived to strip mine an entire planet found itself floating helplessly in space, unable to fight back or even understand what was attacking them. Engineer Stone was monitoring the enemy communications with obvious satisfaction. "They're completely confused. Their engineers are reporting that the failures aren't caused by any form of attack they recognize. Their systems are just ceasing to exist at the quantum level." But the human fleet wasn't content to simply disable their enemies. As Kira watched, the cloaked ships began to reveal themselves in carefully orchestrated patterns, materializing out of empty space like ghosts becoming solid. Each human vessel positioned itself precisely to maximize psychological impact. Smaller ships appearing directly in front of massive harvester gun turrets, larger vessels manifesting behind enemy flagships where their weapons could target critical systems. The tactical beauty of the maneuver was breathtaking. In less than 5 minutes, the Zeltharan fleet found itself completely surrounded by enemies they hadn't even known existed, their own weapons useless, their escape routes blocked by ships that had appeared from nowhere. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the static-filled Zeltharan communications, speaking in their own harsh, clicking language. "Harvester Prime Zektar, this is Admiral Chen of the Human Guardian Fleet. You are surrounded, outgunned, and completely at our mercy. I am prepared to offer terms for your surrender. The response came back immediately, Zektar's voice distorted by rage and disbelief. Impossible. No species possesses technology capable of this level of tactical superiority. Identify yourselves. We are humans, Admiral Chun replied with quiet authority. And we are here because you made the mistake of attacking a child under our protection. Through the enhanced audio systems, Kira could hear the confusion in the Zeltharan communications as enemy commanders tried to process what they were hearing. The concept of a species responding to the harm of a single individual with overwhelming military force was apparently beyond their understanding. Harvester Prime Zektar's voice came back loaded with contempt. You would risk war with the Zeltharan Empire over one primitive colonist? Your species is clearly inferior if you waste resources on such sentiment. Admiral Chen's laugh was cold and utterly without humor. Zektar, you've spent so many centuries harvesting weaker civilizations that you've forgotten what real strength looks like. Allow me to educate you. At her command, the human fleet began demonstrating capabilities that reduced the most advanced Zeltharan technology to primitive toys. Ships that had been crippled by the quantum disruptors were suddenly restored to full functionality, but with their weapon systems modified to fire harmless light displays instead of destructive energy beams. We could have destroyed your entire fleet before you even knew we were here, Admiral Chen continued. Instead, we chose to disable you so we could have this conversation. That choice, the decision to preserve life even when dealing with enemies, is what separates civilized species from parasites like you. Dr. Vasquez was monitoring different communication channels, tracking the responses from individual Zeltharan ships. Several of the smaller vessels are requesting permission to surrender, she reported. Their crews seemed to be realizing the hopelessness of their situation. But Zektar wasn't finished. You think your technological advantages make you superior? The Empire has faced advanced species before. We adapt, we overcome, we harvest. Your precious human colonies will burn within the year. It was then that Admiral Chun revealed the true scope of human preparation for this moment. Zektar, while you've been having this conversation, our intelligence networks have been uploading complete tactical analyses of your technology to every human settlement in this galaxy. We now know the exact specifications of every weapon system you possess, the precise location of every Empire facility, and the identity of every commanding officer in your fleet structure. The Admiral paused to let that information sink in before continuing. More importantly, we've been recording this entire engagement and broadcasting it on quantum frequencies that will reach every civilized species in this sector within 6 hours. The galaxy is about to watch the Zeltharan Empire's supposedly invincible harvest fleet surrender to a force 1/10 their size. Engineer Stone brought up holographic displays showing the communication networks that were carrying the battle footage across known space. Dozens of species were already receiving the transmissions, watching in real time as the terror of the galaxy was reduced to helplessness by beings most of them had never heard of. The psychological impact will be devastating, Dr. Vasquez explained to Kira. The Zeltharan Empire maintains control through fear and the perception of invincibility. Once other species see that the harvesters can be defeated, resistance movements will spring up throughout their territory. But Kira was focused on something else entirely. Through the viewing window, she could see that the cargo holds of several Zeltharan ships were opening, revealing the conditions inside. What she saw made her enhanced reflexes clench with rage. Thousands of sentient beings were crammed into metal cages barely large enough for them to lie down. Men, women, and children from dozens of different species, all showing signs of malnutrition, untreated injuries, and psychological trauma. These were the resources the harvesters had collected from their recent raids, people who would have been sold into slavery or used as forced labor in Empire mining operations. Dr. Vasquez, Kira said quietly, her voice carrying a hardness that surprised even her. Are we going to free them? That's exactly what we're going to do, the doctor replied, noting the change in Kira's tone with professional interest. But first, we're going to make sure the galaxy understands what the Zeltharan Empire really is. Admiral Chen's voice filled the communications again, but this time she was addressing a much wider audience. Citizens of the galaxy, You are witnessing the defeat of Harvester Prime Zektar, architect of 17 genocides, and the enslavement of over 2 million sentient beings. The cargo holds of his ships contain thousands of people stolen from their homes to be sold as slaves. The admiral's voice hardened with righteous anger. The Zeltharan Empire has thrived because civilized species believe they were too powerful to defeat, too entrenched to dislodge. Today, humanity proves that evil is only as strong as the good people who choose to do nothing about it. Zektar made one final desperate attempt to salvage the situation. You cannot destroy us. The Empire spans 1,000 worlds. Our fleets will hunt down every human colony in revenge. Zektar, Admiral Chun replied with quiet finality. You still don't understand. We didn't come here to destroy you. We came here to change you. And we're going to start by showing you what civilization actually looks like. At her command, human ships began deploying what looked like massive medical stations near each disabled harvester vessel. Teams of human doctors and engineers transferred to the enemy ships, not as conquerors, but as healers. Within minutes, they were providing medical treatment to the enslaved beings in the cargo holds, distributing food and water, and beginning the delicate process of psychological rehabilitation. Kira watched in amazement as humans worked side by side with beings from dozens of different species, many of whom they had never encountered before. Language barriers were overcome through universal medical protocols, cultural differences were navigated with patient respect, and hope was restored to people who had believed they would never see home again. This is what humans really are, Dr. Vasquez said softly, watching her colleagues work with the desperate efficiency of people who had trained for exactly this scenario. We're not warriors or conquerors. We're healers, teachers, and protectors. Everything else is just tools we use to accomplish those goals. But the most profound change was happening inside Kira herself. As she watched human medical teams treating beings who had been tortured and enslaved by the same species that had destroyed her home, she began to understand what Dr. Vasquez had meant about humans choosing which kind of people they wanted to be. The rage she felt toward the harvesters was still there, burning bright and hot in her chest. But alongside it was something new, a deep, unshakable conviction that protecting the innocent was worth any sacrifice, any risk, any cost. The transport beam that carried Kira and Dr. Vasquez to the Void Render was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Instead of the crude molecular displacement technology used by most species, human transporters worked by temporarily converting living beings into quantum information and then reconstituting them at the destination. The process felt like being dissolved into pure thought and then remembering how to have a body again. They materialized in the flagship's main corridor, where Admiral Chun was waiting with a squad of human soldiers. But these weren't the heavily armed warriors Kira had expected. Each member of the boarding team carried medical scanners alongside their weapons, and their armor was designed for protection rather than intimidation. Status report, Admiral Chun requested as they began moving toward the ship's command center. Zeltharan crew is in full surrender, reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah Park, the team leader. They're cooperating with our medical teams and providing access to all ship systems. No resistance encountered. Admiral Chun nodded approvingly. Casualties? 0 on both sides, Park replied. Though several Zeltharan crew members have requested political asylum. Apparently, many of them were conscripted into military service against their will. As they walked through the harvester ship's corridors, Kira was struck by the stark differences between human and Zeltharan design philosophy. Where human ships felt organic and welcoming, the Void Render was all sharp angles and harsh lighting. Everything was built to maximum efficiency with no consideration for comfort or aesthetics. But what disturbed her most were the holding cells they passed. Dozens of individual prison units, each barely large enough for a single occupant, lined the corridor walls. Dr. Vasquez explained that these were where valuable prisoners were kept during transport, beings with specialized knowledge or skills that made them worth more than common slaves. The Empire has turned suffering into a science, Dr. Vasquez observed, scanning one of the empty cells with her medical equipment. These facilities are designed to break spirits without damaging physical capabilities. Psychological torture refined to an art form. Lieutenant Commander Park gestured toward a sealed door marked with Zeltharan symbols that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Harvester Prime Zektar has barricaded himself in his personal quarters. He's refusing all communication and has activated some kind of defensive field that our scanners can't penetrate. Admiral Chin studied the door with the calm attention of someone solving a complex puzzle. Life signs. Confirmed. Single occupant, elevated stress indicators, but otherwise stable. Weapons. Unknown. Our quantum disruptors disabled all shipboard weapons systems, but he may have personal armaments that operate on different principles. Admiral Chun turned to Kira, her expression becoming gentle despite the tactical situation. Child, I need to ask you to do something that might be frightening. Are you willing to help us end this peacefully? Kira looked at the sealed door, knowing that behind it was the being responsible for her family's death, for the destruction of her home, for the enslavement of thousands of innocent people. The enhanced reflexes Dr. Vasquez had given her were responding to her emotional state, making her feel stronger and more focused than she had ever been. What do you need me to do? Just be yourself, Admiral Chin replied. Show him that the people he considers expendable resources are real, sentient beings worthy of protection and respect. Sometimes the most powerful argument against evil is simply demonstrating the good it seeks to destroy. Dr. Vasquez activated a communication device that projected her voice through the sealed door. Harvester Prime Zektar, this is Dr. Elena Vasquez of the Human Medical Corps. I have with me Kira Salas, the child from Thessera Prime that your forces left for dead. She would like to speak with you. The response came after a long pause, Zektar's voice distorted by anger and what sounded like genuine confusion. You brought a primitive colonist aboard my flagship? For what purpose? Kira stepped closer to the door, her voice carrying clearly through the communication system. My name is Kira Salas. You killed my parents, Marcus and Elena Salas. You took my brother Tam. You destroyed my home and left me to die under a collapsed beam. Another pause, longer this time. When Zektar spoke again, his tone had changed from confusion to something approaching curiosity. And, for this, an entire fleet of your species came to seek revenge? The resources expended on your rescue exceed the total value of your planet's mineral wealth. They didn't come for revenge, Kira replied, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. They came because I needed help, and humans don't leave children to die alone. The defensive field around the door suddenly deactivated, and the massive portal slid open to reveal Harvester Prime Zektar in all his terrible magnificence. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming black under the harsh lighting of his quarters. His compound eyes reflected the light in patterns that spoke of intelligence far beyond human norms, and his 4 arms ended in claws capable of rending metal. But what struck Kira most powerfully was the expression in those alien eyes. She had expected hatred, rage, or contempt. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like bewilderment. You are the source of all this, Zektar said, his mandibles clicking in what might have been amazement. One small, damaged primitive, and your species mobilized 40,000 ships? Admiral Chin stepped forward, positioning herself protectively between Kira and the massive alien, but her posture remained non-threatening. Harvester Prime Zektar, you've spent so many centuries viewing other beings as resources that you've forgotten their people. Kira represents every innocent life you've destroyed, every family you've torn apart, every dream you've crushed in service to your empire. Zektar's attention shifted to the Admiral, his compound eyes studying her with the intensity of a scientist examining an interesting specimen. Your species demonstrates tactical capabilities that exceed our best projections, yet you waste these advantages on emotional sentimentality. It is illogical. From your perspective, perhaps, Dr. Vasquez interjected, stepping forward with her medical scanner active. But you're making a fundamental error in your analysis. You assume that protecting the innocent weakens us, when in reality, it's the source of our strength. She gestured toward the communication system, where reports from the other captured ships were still coming in. Every human who responded to Kira's distress call did so voluntarily. No conscription, no coercion, no force required. They came because they chose to, because they believe that protecting children is worth any sacrifice. Lieutenant Commander Park was monitoring the ship's internal systems. Admiral, we're receiving reports from our teams throughout the fleet. The enslaved populations have been successfully liberated, and most are requesting transport to human colonies for medical treatment and rehabilitation. Zektar's compound eyes fixed on Kira again, and she forced herself not to step back from that alien stare. You speak of choice, he said slowly. But choice is inefficient. The Empire succeeds because we eliminate choice, enforce compliance, harvest efficiently. And how has that worked out for you today? Kira asked, surprising herself with the boldness of her question. For the first time since the door had opened, Zektar seemed genuinely at a loss for words. His mandibles clicked rapidly in what Dr. Vasquez's translator identified as the Zeltharan equivalent of nervous laughter. Your entire fleet was disabled by a force 1/10 your size, Kira continued, her enhanced confidence growing stronger with each word. Your supposedly invincible technology was defeated by beings you consider primitives. Your 1,000-year empire is about to watch its most powerful Harvester Prime surrender to a single human child. Admiral Chen placed a gentle hand on Kira's shoulder. Child, what would you have us do with him? It was a test, and Kira knew it. The Admiral was giving her the power to determine the fate of the being responsible for her family's death, for the destruction of her world, for the suffering of thousands of enslaved innocents. The rage was still there, burning bright and hot in her chest. The enhanced reflexes Dr. Vasquez had given her were screaming for justice, for revenge, for the satisfaction of seeing her enemy destroyed. It would be so easy to ask for his death, to demand that he pay with his life for the lives he had taken. But, as she looked into those alien compound eyes, Kira began to understand something that surprised her. Zektar wasn't evil in the way she had imagined. He was something worse. He was efficient. He had turned suffering into a technology, slavery into an economy, genocide into a business model. He had become so focused on harvesting that he had forgotten that the beings he harvested were people. I want him to see, Kira said finally. I want him to meet every person he enslaved, to learn their names, to understand that each one had a family and dreams and the right to be free. I want him to spend the rest of his life making amends for what he's done. Zektar's mandibles stopped clicking. You would spare me? I would change you, Kira replied. The same way Dr. Vasquez changed me. She didn't just heal my injuries. She made me stronger, better, more capable of protecting others. Humans can do the same for you, if you're willing to let them. Admiral Chen nodded approvingly. Harvester Prime Zektar, by the authority vested in me by the Human Colonial Alliance, I hereby place you under protective custody pending a full review of your crimes against sentient beings. You will be provided with legal representation, medical care, and the opportunity to make restitution for the harm you've caused. Zektar looked from the Admiral to Kira and back again, his compound eyes reflecting what the translator identified as profound confusion. You defeat me utterly, take me prisoner, and offer me legal protection? Your species makes no logical sense. Dr. Vasquez smiled as she began scanning the alien with her medical equipment. Zektar, logic is just one way of understanding the universe. Humans have discovered that compassion, justice, and the protection of innocence are far more powerful forces than pure efficiency. She paused in her scanning to look directly at the massive alien. We're going to help you discover that too. Lieutenant Commander Park was receiving new communications from the human fleet. Admiral, we're getting reports from allied species throughout the sector. 3 different civilizations are offering to provide testimony about Zeltharan war crimes. And at least a dozen resistance movements have begun organizing in Empire territory. Admiral Chen nodded with satisfaction. The psychological impact is exactly what we hoped for. Word of today's victory will spread throughout the galaxy within days. Species that have lived in fear of the harvesters will begin to understand that resistance is possible. But Kira was focused on something else entirely. Through the flagship's viewing ports, she could see the liberated beings from the cargo holds being transferred to human medical ships. Thousands of people who had been condemned to slavery or death were now receiving the finest care that human medicine could provide. What happens to them? She asked. They go home, Dr. Vasquez replied simply. Every single one of them. We've already dispatched ships to begin repairing the worlds the Empire has damaged, and Our xenobiologists are working on rehabilitation programs for the psychological trauma. She gestured toward the viewing port where the rescue operations were continuing. This is what humans do, Kira. We don't just defeat evil, we heal the damage it causes. We don't just win battles, we build the peace that follows. Zektar had been listening to this exchange with what appeared to be growing amazement. You expend resources to repair worlds you do not control, to heal beings who cannot repay you? That's exactly right, Admiral Chen replied. Because the measure of a civilization isn't how much it can take from others, it's how much it gives freely to those in need. As human security officers moved to escort Zektar to a transport ship where he would begin the long process of rehabilitation and restitution, Kira realized that her journey was far from over. She had gone from victim to survivor to witness, but now she understood that there was one more transformation waiting for her. 6 months after the Battle of Thessera Prime, Kira stood on the observation deck of Guardian Station Alpha, watching as the newest class of recruits completed their training exercises in the space around the station. The facility had been built in orbit around her homeworld, which had been transformed from a ruined colony into the sector headquarters for the Human Guardian Corps. The changes were remarkable. Where once there had been only scattered settlements, now gleaming cities rose from the purple plains, their architecture a harmonious blend of human engineering and local materials. The crystal caves that Kira had explored as a child had been expanded into vast underground complexes that housed research facilities, medical centers, and schools where children from dozens of species learned together. Dr. Vasquez approached from behind, her footsteps silent on the station's organic flooring. "The morning briefing is ready," she said gently. "Are you prepared?" Kira nodded, though she still felt nervous about addressing the gathered representatives from across the galaxy. In the months since the battle, she had become something she never expected, a symbol of hope for species that had lived in fear of the harvesters for generations. They walked together through corridors that pulsed with the same bioluminescent glow as the Guardian stones, past windows that showed the bustling activity of the most important diplomatic facility in the sector. Ships from hundreds of worlds docked daily at Guardian Station Alpha, bringing refugees, delegates, and volunteers who wanted to join the growing alliance of species united against oppression. The main briefing chamber was filled with beings Kira was still learning to recognize: the crystalline Solarans who communicated through light patterns, the aquatic depths who required special environmental suits to attend meetings, the plant-like verdants whose speech sounded like wine through leaves. Representatives from 47 different species had gathered to hear the quarterly report on what the galactic media had dubbed the Thessera transformation. Admiral Chun was waiting at the central podium, but she stepped aside as Kira entered. This was her presentation to give, her story to tell, her vision of the future to share. 6 months ago, Kira began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. I was just another colonist's daughter living a quiet life on a farming world. My biggest concerns were finishing my schoolwork and avoiding the deep pools in the crystal caves where the Terex liked to nest. Gentle laughter rippled through the audience. Beings who had known only war and oppression were still learning to appreciate the simple joys that peace could bring. Then, the harvesters came. Kira continued, her tone becoming serious. In 3 days, they took everything I had ever known. My parents, my brother, my home, my future. They left me to die because I was too damaged to be worth their effort. She gestured toward the viewing windows, where the rebuilt surface of Thessera Prime gleamed in the morning sunlight. But they made a mistake. They assumed that leaving me alive didn't matter because no one would come to help. They had spent so many centuries crushing hope that they forgot some species' refuse to let children suffer alone. The Solaran representative pulsed with patterns of light that the translator interpreted as deep appreciation. The human response was unprecedented in our historical records. No species had ever mobilized such resources for a single individual. That's because most species think about rescue missions in terms of cost-benefit analysis. Dr. Vasquez interjected from her position near the podium. Humans measure success differently. For us, the value of a life isn't determined by its utility, it's inherent. Kira nodded, then activated the holographic display system that would show the audience the broader implications of that philosophy. What happened here wasn't just a rescue mission. It was proof that the galaxy can change, that evil can be defeated, and that civilizations can choose to protect rather than exploit. The display showed statistical data that would have been unthinkable just 6 months earlier. Zeltharan slave raids had decreased by 90% as their fleet strength was redirected toward rehabilitation programs overseen by human counselors. 17 former Empire worlds had declared independence and joined the growing alliance of free species. Most importantly, not a single new species had been enslaved since the Battle of Thessera Prime. The psychological impact has been even more significant than the military victory, Admiral Chen explained, taking over the presentation. Species that had accepted subjugation as inevitable are now actively resisting Zeltharan expansion. The Empire is being forced to negotiate rather than simply harvest. A new voice entered the conversation, one that still made Kira feel a complex mixture of emotions. Former Harvester Prime Zektar had been granted permission to address the assembly via a holographic projection from the rehabilitation facility where he was serving his sentence. The massive alien appeared in the center of the chamber, but he looked dramatically different from the terrifying figure who had once commanded the Empire's most powerful fleet. His chitinous exoskeleton had been modified with biotechnological implants that allowed him to experience emotions as other species understood them. The compound eyes that had once reflected only cold efficiency now showed what the translators identified as genuine remorse. Citizens of the galaxy, Zektar began, his mandibles clicking in patterns that had been programmed to convey humility. I appear before you today not as a conqueror, but as evidence that even the most corrupted beings can be rehabilitated through the application of patience, wisdom, and justice. He turned his massive head toward Kira, and she saw something in those alien eyes that she was still learning to trust, genuine respect. This child taught me that the beings I had reduced to inventory entries were individuals with their own hopes, dreams, and inherent worth. She showed mercy to the architect of her family's destruction, and, in doing so, demonstrated the true strength that civilizations require to survive. The rehabilitation process had been one of the most controversial aspects of the human response to the Zeltharan Empire. Many species had demanded Zektar's execution, arguing that his crimes warranted the ultimate punishment. But humans had insisted on a different approach, one that focused on understanding the psychological and cultural factors that had created such a predatory mindset. Dr. Vasquez had led the research team that developed the empathy implants now carried by all former Zeltharan military personnel. The technology didn't just allow them to feel emotions. It forced them to experience the psychological state of their former victims, to understand suffering from the perspective of those who had endured it. The process is not pleasant, Zektar continued, his voice carrying nuances of pain that would have been impossible for his species to express naturally. To suddenly comprehend the magnitude of suffering one has caused, to feel the terror and despair of those you have harmed. It is a form of justice more complete than mere death. A representative from the Keth Confederacy, a species that had lost 3 worlds to Zeltharan raids, raised what appeared to be a questioning appendage. You speak of justice, but what assurance do we have that this rehabilitation is genuine? How do we know you will not simply return to your former behavior when the opportunity arises? It was Kira who answered, standing to address the Keth directly. Because he can't, she said simply. The empathy implants are permanent and irreversible. Every former harvester now carries within them the emotional experience of every being they ever harmed. They literally cannot cause suffering without experiencing it themselves. She paused, looking around the chamber at representatives from species that had known only fear for generations. But, more importantly, we're not just changing individual harvesters, we're changing their entire civilization. Every Zeltharan colony is now required to participate in cultural exchange programs with species they've previously enslaved. They're learning what other civilizations are really like, not just as resources to be harvested, but as people with their own value and dignity. The holographic display updated to show footage from Zeltharan worlds where former slave raiders were now working alongside their former victims in joint construction projects, medical facilities, and educational institutions. The images were striking. Beings who had been mortal enemies just months before now collaborating on projects that benefited everyone involved. Admiral Chen gestured toward the display with obvious pride. This is the human model of victory. We don't just defeat our enemies, we transform them into allies. We don't just end conflicts, we build the frameworks for lasting peace. The Verdal representative rustled in what the translator conveyed as thoughtful consideration. Your species has accomplished in 6 months what the Galactic Council could not achieve in 6 centuries. However, there are concerns about the scope of your expansion. 47 species have joined your alliance, and more request membership daily. Are you building an empire of your own? It was a question that had been asked repeatedly in recent months, and one that Kira had learned to address directly. We're not building an empire, she replied firmly. We're building a network of mutual protection and cooperation. Every species that joins our alliance retains complete sovereignty over their internal affairs. We only ask that they commit to the same principle that brought us all together, the protection of innocence. Dr. Vasquez activated another display showing the structure of what was being called the Guardian Alliance. Unlike traditional imperial hierarchies, the alliance was organized as a distributed network where each member species maintained equal representation and decision-making authority. The human role is primarily technological and logistical, Dr. Vasquez explained. We provide the advanced systems that make rapid response possible, but every rescue mission, every diplomatic initiative, every cultural exchange program is decided by consensus among all member species. Zektar's hologram flickered as he prepared to speak again. If I may address the concerns about human expansion, I have studied their historical records extensively during my rehabilitation. This species has never sought to dominate others. When they achieved the capability for interstellar travel, they could have easily conquered dozens of worlds. Instead, they chose to explore, to learn, to build relationships with other civilizations. He paused, his modified vocal systems conveying what sounded almost like wonder. They're the first species I have encountered that possesses overwhelming military superiority, yet chooses not to use it for conquest. They view strength as a responsibility to protect the weak rather than an opportunity to exploit them. The assembly fell silent as the implications of this statement settled over the chamber. Many of the species present had been shaped by millennia of conflict, where strength inevitably led to dominance, and dominance led to oppression. The concept of a species that deliberately chose restraint despite overwhelming capability was genuinely revolutionary. Kira felt the weight of that moment, the understanding that what had begun as a simple rescue mission had evolved into something that could reshape the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. She thought about her parents, about her brother Tam, who was now receiving counseling from human psychologists to help him process his captivity, about the 43 people who had died in the initial Harvester attack. They had become symbols of something larger than themselves, proof that every life had value, that every innocent deserved protection, that every species had the capacity for growth and change. 6 months ago, I was left for dead by beings who saw me as worthless, Kira said, bringing the assembly's attention back to her. Today, I stand before you as evidence that no one is worthless, that every voice matters, and that the galaxy can choose hope over fear. She gestured toward the viewing windows where ships from across the known galaxy continued their constant arrivals and departures. Guardian Station Alpha isn't just a military facility or a diplomatic center. It's a promise, the promise that no child will ever again cry out in the darkness without receiving an answer. The Solarian representative pulsed with patterns of brilliant light that conveyed what could only be described as joy. The transformation you describe extends beyond military victories or political alliances. You have changed the fundamental nature of what it means to be civilized. Admiral Chen nodded approvingly. That was always the goal, not to create a human empire, but to demonstrate that technology and strength exist to serve life, not to dominate it. Every species in this galaxy now has proof that predators like the old Zeltharan Empire can be defeated, transformed, and replaced with something better. As the assembly began to break into smaller discussion groups, Kira found herself standing alone at the viewing windows, looking down at the world that had been reborn from ashes and loss. The purple plains of Thessera Prime now bloomed with gardens tended by beings from dozens of worlds. The crystal caves echoed with the laughter of children learning to explore together, and the skies carried ships bringing hope to species that had forgotten such things were possible. Dr. Vasquez joined her at the window, her presence as comforting now as it had been. She was going to become a protector. The galaxy had just watched the most powerful military force in human history mobilize to save a single child. But, more importantly, it had seen what humans did after they won. They healed, they rebuilt, they protected. And, at the center of it all was Kira Salas, the girl who had been left for dead and had instead become the catalyst for the greatest change the galaxy had seen in 1,000 years. Engineer Stone looked up from his monitoring station. "Admiral, we're receiving surrender requests from 11 of the 12 enemy vessels. Only Zektar's flagship is still refusing to cooperate." "Then, we'll have to be more persuasive," Admiral Chen replied. "Kira, Dr. Vasquez, I need you both to prepare for transfer to the Void Render. It's time for Harvester Prime Zektar to meet the child whose suffering brought this reckoning to his door." Kira felt her enhanced reflexes surge with nervous energy. "You want me to talk to him? I want him to see you," Admiral Chen replied. "I want him to understand that the beings he considers expendable resources are real people with families, dreams, and the right to live free from fear. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against evil is simply showing it the face of innocence." As Dr. Vasquez began preparing for the transfer to the enemy flagship, Kira realized that her role in this conflict was far from over. She had gone from being a victim left for dead to being a symbol of everything humanity stood for. And, in a few minutes, she would face the monster responsible for her family's death and show him exactly why humans were the most dangerous species in the galaxy. What they didn't know was that humans had been preparing for this exact scenario since before they ever left their home system. Every tactical manual, every weapon system, every strategic doctrine had been designed around the assumption that they would always be outnumbered and outgunned. The Zelthran Empire was about to discover what happened when an unstoppable force met an immovable object. And at the center of it all was one small girl who had been left for dead, now watching as the most powerful military force in human history prepared to teach the galaxy that some species protected the innocent no matter the cost. Admiral Chen's voice came over the ship's communication system one final time before the battle began. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. Today we fight not just for one child, but for every child who has ever cried out in the darkness and received no answer. Today we show the galaxy that humanity stands between the predators and the prey. Today we prove that evil triumphs only when good people do nothing." The countdown to engagement had begun, and with it, the moment that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Dr. Vasquez paused in her work, her expression becoming distant. "Child, humans have been preparing for this moment since we first learned about the Harvesters 3 years ago. We've studied their technology, their tactics, their psychology. We've prepared countermeasures for every weapon system they possess, and contingency plans for every strategic advantage they think they hold." She leaned closer to Kira, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more authority than any shout could have managed. "But, most importantly, we've been waiting for an opportunity to make them understand that in this galaxy, there are consequences for hurting children. You, Kira Salas, are going to help us deliver that message." As the medical pod systems began their final healing cycles, Kira felt herself drifting towards sleep for the first time since the attack. But, instead of the nightmares she expected, her dreams were filled with the image of Dr. Vasquez's smile and the warm glow of the Guardian Stones. Somewhere in the depths of space, the Zelthran Harvest fleet was turning around, drawn back to Thessera Prime by the promise of resources they had missed in their initial raid. They had no idea that they were flying directly into a trap that had been 3 years in the making, or that their decision to leave one small girl for dead was about to teach them why humans were the most dangerous species in the galaxy.